April, the cruelest month. A dead bird at the door. Marlowe takes pictures and dispatches the corpse, not being one of those photographers interested in documenting the process of decomposition. On TV, another mass shooting, the gun freedom tax, another atrocity in the suburbs of Damascus, rain, and too wet to paint outside. Marlowe brooded about his blue onion paintings. The only one he'd keep was the Max Tavern bullet hole. That one was right. He now composed Big Ed and Big Larry and Susie painted from the back on their stools. Standing at butt level, little Jimmy faces viewer, Combs Aviation stenciled on his shirt. Marlowe limited the wrestlers to Dick the Bruiser and the Crusher, many plates of Chinese food, with particular detail on the green pepper beef tomato chop suey. Tying this into the kitchen scene where Jimmy Wong now clutches wrestling tickets as Stanley menaces Nina, waiting for more wonton. Pop, the dishwasher, he'd paint as a standalone, focus on the milky, wandering eye. Marlowe could almost smell the wino breath. Bizarre what we remember. But he feared, even if he had the facility to execute such paintings, a need to make the canvases pleasing might compel him to gauze over deeper childhood insights. Nor had he suspected the work involved, the many pictures needed to compile one right picture. Marlowe's cousin Ken reminded him of an incident he had no memory of. Ken at that time was a busboy at the Blue Onion, and Marlowe had graduated to managing the door. It was a crowded night and the wait list was long. Somebody offered Marlowe $20 to move things along and get them a spot. Apparently Marlowe went up to a table of dawdlers and told them, with as much savoir-faire as he could muster, that it was time to go. And seems they left without a fuss. Marlowe got the money, and his cousin was impressed. "Wow," Marlowe told Ken. "I'd like to be the guy who could do that." "You were that guy," Ken said. They were in Marlowe's studio. He was showing his cousin what he did, talking art, this project, a painting journal as a Dickensian serial, the artist's duty to clang the bell loud in times of confusion, the need to clang the bell loud to announce his traveling troupe was in town. He'd need to puff up big, blow hard, make a big win, leave the studio, go into the world, do the dance. And he could be nuts. Plus, there was insecurity and trepidation, common to artists before a show. He and Ken stood in front of the prophet lepton. Love should never cost more than 10 cents. Marlowe confessed he had no idea what that meant. He just showed up and wrote down whatever the palm gods told him. Fine, as long as he was living in his head, but soon he'd have to face the mob, and they likely wouldn't be as beneficent as his cousin. Marlowe had judged other artists' work, was opinionated, prideful of his eye, often generous, but sometimes too harsh. A gatekeeper, thumbs up, thumbs down, susceptible to a new flavor, to opinion, to fashion, susceptible to gloss, not always the most sophisticated, sometimes a know-all, sometimes a dope. Soon, it would be his turn to be judged, his turn on the gallows, his turn to be Mr. Ned Dennis, the hangman from Charles Dickens' Barnaby Rudge. Mr. Dennis wore the clothes of those he hanged. He would brag he was the best hangman, took his charges out with a gentle yank, and when in front of the condemned whose necks would snap at dawn, he preached dignity. Don't whine, don't whimper, don't tear your shirts, you sniveling dogs. Show some pride, show some self-respect. Then Mr. Ned Dennis found himself on the other side of the bars, and when it was his time for the noose, they had to drag the hangman out in his belly, screaming and bellowing all the way to the gallows. Marlowe spoke of a disturbing dream. A friend's son smoking a cigarette, just back from Rome where he had run in a marathon. The kid was no longer in training, obviously. "How was Rome?" Marlowe asked. "Great," said the kid. "Thanks for asking." And he hurried off to a party, not wanting to engage. Marlowe arrived at the party, and no one was interested in him. This wasn't Smarty's party, where past and future intertwined. The vibe was now. He'd entered a fancy modern house with many levels. like one of those houses in glossy magazine spreads in which Marlowe dreamed his art would adorn. He had a vague idea the owner was a tech mogul. Thin staircases were packed with guests moving up and down. People were sprawled on a daybed listening to someone play guitar. Everyone was the age of his son's friend. The music too saccharine for Marlowe's hard-boiled ear. No Etta James. Young Puff was probably somewhere in the mix, out of prison, and now a zillionaire, having invented some biofeedback app. There was a water feature in the living room, a photo shoot, barefoot women in heavy robes, perhaps a Greek tragedy theme. A photographer says, "Take that off." Marlowe had tried on a cowboy hat with intricate embroidery, apparently an expensive item, artware, not headwear. Another Marlowe faux pas. He'd have to be careful. He had a habit of spilling red wine on white things. Now, up the staircase, when an undulating paper-thin screen like a stingray or an eagle ray swoops his head, some marvelous future technology for the virtual guest to swim through the hubbub. Great way to socialize and not drink. Big market for the home arrested. As the screen ray curls around the corner, Marlowe glimpses a star, Princess Shalmar. But when he reaches the next level, the screen crashes to the floor. In need of rescue, not to be stepped on, he gently lifts the screen over his head, pushes through the crowd, but only gets another step before the picture dissolves to withered flowers. It might as well have been ash.